Disappointment with the ballot. Guinea goes to the ballot box and delayed parliamentary elections.
None of us is completely safe from terrorism, as it can happen anywhere, anytime, and to anyone. We must therefore increase vigilance, enhance regional and global cooperation, and scale up the fight against terrorism.
My brother's keeper, African leaders reaffirmed commitment in fight against terrorism. And counterproductive, the Kenyan government says it's unnecessary for the US to issue travel advisory after the terror attack. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, where we bring you African and global news from all perspectives. I'm Famida Miller. It's 8 p.m. here in Nairobi, Kenya, noon in Washington, D.C. and 1 a.m. in Beijing. Also coming up in the next half hour. Strained ties, why the Egyptian foreign minister is uneasy about his country's relations with America. And we tell you about concerted efforts by African health experts to contain infectious diseases. We begin in West Africa with some tragic news coming out of Nigeria. As many as 40 people are feared dead after a boat sank on River Niger in central Nigeria on Friday. Rescue teams are searching for a further 100 people reported missing. The boats, with an estimated 150 people on board, reportedly split in two after setting off from Malili village in Niger State. The State Rescue Agency has told AFP News Agency that the boat was overloaded with passengers and goods. Rescue teams were on site. High waters on the Niger River have been a contributing factor to ships and boats capsizing. Guineans have been voting in a parliamentary election. This is being seen as a big step towards completing the country's political transition after a 2008 military coup. The election, which is 2 years overdue, comes amid allegations from the opposition that the government's been trying to rig the vote. Incumbent President Alpha Conde hopes these polls will allow the country to emerge from a chaotic 5-year transition period. If declared credible, the vote will free up some 140 million euros in European Union aid. Guinea's Election Commission said on the eve of the ballot that conditions required for the poll to be credible were being met. It said 93% of voter cards had been distributed. However, problems were reported in several polling stations in Conakry and other regions, including a lack of indelible ink and voting cards going missing. Now, the Guinea legislative polls come amid numerous delays and a campaign plagued by deadly unrest. CCTV's Maria Galang has the story.
5 million Guineans head to the polls. 1,700 candidates vie for 114 seats in a National Assembly, which will replace the transitional parliament that has been run in the country since military rule came to an end in 2010. The vote was initially due to have been held within 6 months of the swearing-in of President Alpha Conde in December of that year, but it has been delayed amid disputes over its organization. This week, opposition protesters shot dead a trainee policeman as renewed clashes broke out across the city, leaving more than 70 people wounded.
The
election is really too hard because it seems like the government will do anything to win the elections, even by force.
We are scared. We don't sleep. There is no security.
Politics in Guinea typically polarizes some 24 ethnic groups who otherwise live in harmony alongside each other, with the Fulani, the largest at around 40% of the population, followed by the Malinka and Susu. The country's iron-fisted first president, Ahmed Sékou Touré, was a Malinka who ruled for 26 years until his death in 1984. Denouncing the economically dominant Fulani as hoarders of the country's wealth. When Alpha Conde, also a Malinka, defeated Fulani opponent Selou Dalein Diallo in 2010, this once again deprived the country's biggest and wealthiest ethnic group of political power again. A Guinean minister said on Wednesday that the country was, quote, in danger from outsiders plotting against it amid media reports that a coup was being planned in the capital Conakry.
La Guinée est en danger.
Guinea is in danger and the strings are being pulled from outside. And some of the politicians that have sided off their political options are at the heart of this commotion.
Despite having some of the world's largest bauxite reserves as well as gold, iron ore and diamonds, most Guineans struggle to get by. Despite the tensions, many hope that this vote will usher in a new dawn for Guinea. Maria Galang, CCTV.
Now, Guinea is a country rich in natural resources, but more than half the population lives under the poverty line. Here are some other facts about the country. Bordering the northern Atlantic Ocean in tropical West Africa, Guinea covers 245,900 square meters, rather kilometers. Its neighbors are Sierra Leone to the south and Guinea-Bissau to the north, and it shares borders with Liberia, Ivory Coast, Mali and Senegal. Guinea has a population of 11.2 million and the capital city is Conakry. French is the official language. 90% of the population is Muslim, the other 10% is Christian and animist, and its population is made up of some 30 ethnic groups. Tanzanian President Jakaya Kikwete expressed solidarity with the Kenyan people on Friday in response to the attack on the Westgate Mall in Nairobi. At least 67 people were killed in the terror attack. Speaking at the UN General Assembly in New York, Kikwete said he'd spoken with Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta to reaffirm Tanzania's solidarity in the fight against terrorism. Meanwhile, Mali's new president also took advantage of the platform to announce that his country will hold 2 rounds of legislative elections before the end of the year. Ibrahim Boubacar Keita told the UN General Assembly that the first round of elections will be held on November 24th, with the second round on December 15.
This heinous attack is a heartbreaking reminder of the threat that terrorism poses to humanity. Indeed, none of us is completely safe from terrorism, as it can happen anywhere, anytime, and to anyone. We must therefore increase vigilance, enhance regional and global cooperation, and scale up the fight against terrorism.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mali is back. Mali again takes up its place, its rightful place in keeping with its rich history in the community of free and democratic states. The Malian people stand ready to take part, a fully fledged part in building a world of peace, a world of tolerance, a world of freedom, and a world of justice in the world of democracies.
Let's now cross to New York, where Stephen Fee is standing by to give us the latest from the UN General Assembly. Stephen, which other African countries are still due to address the General Assembly, and what's likely to be the agenda?
Yeah, well, we're expecting in just a few moments to hear from the Egyptian foreign minister, a highly anticipated speech here at the United Nations. And we've moved into the ministerial level of a lot of these high-level speeches. But overall, what we're really expecting to hear about are things like the Millennium Development Goals. That's the set of 8 development targets that the United Nations has set, which are set to expire in 2015. So a lot of African leaders are looking ahead to what comes next. But we've also heard a lot of talk about some disputes within the continent in particular, and also a particular note about terrorism. A lot of African leaders, as well as non-African leaders, have taken the stage and talked about the Kenya terrorist strike on the Westgate Mall in particular, among many other issues. So that's what we're really looking for in the next couple of speeches.
Now, the issue of terrorism, of course, affecting countries across the globe, but have African leaders used the platform to address issues within their countries or matters that affect the entire globe?
Well, as you know, the audiences for these types of speeches tend to be both domestic and international. And we've seen a lot of common themes in particular among African leaders, especially about reform of global institutions like the United Nations. We've heard a number of leaders.
Unfortunately, it appears as if we've lost Stephen Fee there. Apologies for that. Now, moving on to Tunisia, the Islamist government there has agreed to resign. Negotiations are due to start next week with secular opponents to form a caretaker administration and prepare for elections. The negotiations aim to end weeks of crisis involving the Islamist-led coalition government and secular opposition parties. that have threatened to scuttle the transition to democracy in that North African country. Since the ouster of Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali in 2011, Tunisia struggled with divisions over the political role of Islam. The opposition accuses the ruling Ennahda party of imposing an Islamist agenda on one of the Muslim world's most secular nations. Now, it's time now for a quick break. When we come back. Counterproductive, Kenyan government says it's unnecessary for the US to issue travel advisory after the Westgate Mall siege. And strained ties, why Egyptian foreign minister is uneasy about his country's relations with America.
We follow the latest trends in global politics, economics, culture and sport, and how Africa fits into the global picture. You decide what's important.
We need a trade justice.
Africa's future will be determined by Africa.
For women's equal opportunity, for a better life.
We have to change something, and it's not the outsiders.
Talk Africa, a new voice for the world.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Now, let's return to one of our earlier stories. Guineans have been voting in a parliamentary election. This is, of course, the first parliamentary election since 2008. Now, to discuss the political transition in Guinea a little further, we're joined live by Professor Joab Toka from the American Graduate School of International Affairs and Diplomacy. Professor Toka, welcome to Africa Live. Now, this election is 2 years later than initially planned. Is Guinea likely to get back onto the right track once these polls are over? And, of course, looking forward to presidential polls a little later on.
Well, this actually may be indeed the right formula, back on track, because we know what happened in Guinea for over the last 2 decades or so, with the on and off hopes and perspectives regarding a democratic vote. So according to the echoes we get over the last 12 hours or so since voting has started, there are all kinds of signs as to the legitimacy and the orderly way in which the vote is taking place. But the very fact it does take place today, in spite of what the opposition has been warning about for a long time, as if election day will never happen. This is actually an encouraging sign, and I'm saying that with all the caution which is needed. But as you know, there is an overall discourse in the West which pushes towards that kind of democratic excesses, and there are many things to say about that pro-democratic, pro-voting discourse, which is problematic, at times hypocritical, even more hypocritical where it's held by those who have exploited colonially and otherwise other countries. But the idea of voting rather than non-voting is always sort of a favorite one, because it according to Western logic, it does encourage participation, it does encourage some kind of legitimacy which is more solid, and it does encourage some kind of external participation in terms of local populations, wherever they'll be, associated with some larger movements elsewhere in the world. And this has proven over the last 3, 4, 5 generations to be more often right than wrong. Let's just hope that it's going to be the case in Guinea these hours.
All right, Professor Toka, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. We're speaking there to Professor Joav Toka from the American Graduate School of International Affairs and Diplomacy. Now, let's move to Kenya, and it's exactly 1 week since a terrorist attack at the Westgate Mall in the capital, Nairobi. The attack left at least 67 people dead, but as Jane Keogh reports, life is gradually returning to normal, even as the United States government slapped a travel advisory on the East African nation.
Like many, last Saturday is one George Kamau, a florist who operated just outside the Westgate Mall, will never forget.
This man was playing everywhere. So in fact, he was bouncing. This thing was, I don't know whether the machine was bouncing him or what, because one was playing everywhere. Because this thing was deadly. So it was deadly. Furthermore, it affected our whole of our life because our business now is over. Now we have to start the business.
And George has just begun. He reopened his 7-year-old business today, but he says it's a small price to pay, considering the circumstances.
It was very, very, very horrific. I don't want to see anything like that once in my life about what's happened and what I saw.
Indeed, it's a story of trying to move on, reflections and planning ahead as life slowly comes back to normal in the mall's vicinity. Mark Ngige, a furniture dealer, also reopened his business Saturday.
I am afraid, but we need to work to eat. God will protect us.
Still, several businesses and offices remain closed owing to the continuing operations by forensic experts at the mall.
Well, 1 week on, as Kenyans pick up the pieces of what has been a shattering and terrifying ordeal, there are also many hard-pressing, unanswered questions.
While the Al-Shabaab maintains it carried out the attack to avenge Kenya's incursion into Somalia, questions on the attackers' identities and the exact number of casualties abound and have kicked off a stormy debate in the country. The government says 67 people died in the 4-day siege. According to the Kenya Red Cross, 61 people are still missing. The Kenya government also says security forces had killed 5 terrorists. But in the meantime, the effects of the attacks are being felt far and wide. On Saturday morning, the U.S. State Department issued a travel advisory, which the Kenya government immediately rebutted as, quote, uncalled for and unnecessary.
We shall not relent.
Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta, in one of his briefings, pointed out that the terrorist act was visited on Kenya by foreigners, some of them U.S. citizens, and the travel advisory from Washington is likely to create some feeling of betrayal during Kenya's hour of need. For most Kenyans, though, it's all about moving on, in the hope that a similar incident will never happen again. Jane Keogh, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
In a related development, hotels and restaurants in Somalia have been warned they too are targets for Al-Shabaab terror attacks. Somali government's urging owners to cooperate with security agencies. CCTV's Mohammed Emoge has more.
Al-Shabaab has launched several high-profile guerrilla-style strikes in Mogadishu. Just 2 days after President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud took office, suicide bombers attacked his hotel. The city's restaurants also have been hit.
This is the village restaurant, less than a kilometer from the presidential palace. It's a spot many would believe has tight security. But contrary to that, Al-Shabaab attacked here twice in suicide blasts.
The latest attack, 2 weeks ago, killed 18 people. Al-Shabaab claims the restaurant's a den for Western spies. The government fears more attacks are likely.
Hotel and estate owners should closely work with security and intelligence agencies and should adhere to security conditions put in place by these agencies. Your cooperation is vital in maintaining security.
Al-Shabaab have on occasion infiltrated restaurants and hotels in Mogadishu and then attacked. The government wants owners and managers to be more vigilant.
This is to ensure that criminals don't get operational bases where they can hatch plots to attack.
Mogadishu has been rebuilding since African Union forces drove out Al-Shabaab in August 2011. But Somali security forces remain on constant alert. Mohammed Irmogi, CCTV, Mogadishu.
To Egypt now, and the country's foreign ministers describe relations with America as unsettled. The two countries had been allies under Hosni Mubarak's rule, but recent political upheavals have strained relations. So what next? CCTV's Yasser Hakim's filed this report.
Relations between Washington and Cairo have rarely been stable, but in recent months they've been under pressure thanks to the election and then ousting of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi.
The U.S. refrained from supporting the ouster of Morsi. It doesn't want a military-backed government and called for guarantees of a democratic transition of power and a halt to violence. This led to worsening relations. Egypt went as far as publicly denouncing the U.S., and politicians called for closeness with Russia as an alternative.
U.S. President Barack Obama's speech this week at the UN, however, has been described as a major shift towards reconciliation. He described Morsi as a leader who failed to meet the expectations of his people. Public opinion in Egypt is still skeptical.
Egypt is an important power in the region, which the U.S. needs as an ally to preserve peace for Israel, while Egypt needs the U.S. support politically and economically.
But what's next for the two countries?
U.S. must take concrete steps to prove it's a real ally to the Egyptians to retain our trust.
Egypt's Foreign Minister Nabil Fahmy opened the door, saying the country understands that U.S. policy after Morsi's ousting was a mistake.
It is normal that many countries will reassess their position vis-à-vis the current leadership, because we know that the 30th of June revolution came as a surprise to all nations. And I'm sure that the U.S. and other countries will soon approach us, and we will welcome that.
And there are signs Washington is reaching out. The U.S. announced on Thursday that it will strongly support Egypt in its quest for a badly needed loan package from the IMF and the World Bank. Another sign of good faith from the Americans. Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Cairo.
Africa Live returns with more after this break, including we tell you about concerted efforts by African health experts to contain infectious diseases.
In the first round of beatings, Wangari got very severely injured. It's like they had targeted her. So she got hit on the head, she got hit on her back, everywhere.
You'd look at her at home and wonder, is this the same person? Because she's so gentle and calm, like a dove at home. And then she gets out there, and the passion for whatever issue it is of the day that she's concerned about, you know, she'd really fight hard.
Wangari had the best smile, and she maintained it to the last minute.
Many of the world's deadliest infections first emerged among animals, and many of them in Africa's Congo Basin. Now health officials from the region are to collaborate to try and stop these natural-born killers. CCTV's Maria Galang has the story.
Experts from health, education and agriculture from Ethiopia, the DR Congo, Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya and Tanzania drawn together in Addis Ababa as the One Health Central and Eastern Africa Network. They have one mission in mind: to detect new infections among animals and to stop them spreading to humans.
60% of the diseases that man suffers from come from animals. So there is a need for us to work together. We cannot afford to continue spending more money and resources, and also people suffering because of lack of coordination.
In the past 60 years, more than 300 new diseases have been reported, almost two-thirds of them from animals. They include Ebola, HIV and the H1N1 flu virus.
There are three primary areas where new diseases emerge from. One is in Southeast Asia. One is the Amazon region of the Americas, and the other is the Congo Basin, Central Africa, within the Africa region.
The One Health Network wants to harmonize health services that deal with humans and animals and create a task force that can detect potential threats and contain any outbreak. Much of the work will depend on changing attitudes.
In our culture, we have a tradition to drink raw milk. We have a tradition to eat raw meat. So those could be potential sources, unless we assure that the animals are healthy.
Every year, disease kills millions in Africa. Officials say cross-border and cross-discipline collaboration is critical to saving lives. Maria Galang, CCTV.
It's been a historic win for a Senegalese-born chemist, Karimba Diabli. He's become the first black member of the German parliament. The 52-year-old now represents the Social Democratic Party in the economically ailing East German city of Halle.
28 years ago, when he arrived from Senegal, he could hardly speak a word of German. He came to study chemistry, which he now holds a doctorate degree. Little was it thought then that he would make it to the federal legislature. Karimba Diaby's election into the German parliament is a historic win.
Everything was a little exciting with me because the list wasn't decided so quickly. We didn't know exactly who would get through and how many. I went to bed without knowing that I'd become a member of parliament. And then when I woke up, I looked on the internet early, on the German parliament website, and I found my picture and my CV and everything configured very professionally. And that was the pleasant surprise of the day.
Born in 1961, he grew up as an orphan and was raised by his sister. Shortly after his move to Halle, Diaby says he often felt isolated as a student at the Halle University in the then communist and overwhelmingly white East Germany in the 1980s. This discrimination did not deter his path to success. The handyman and chemist, whose lives have changed dramatically after the fall of the Berlin Wall, is what stoked his interest in local politics. It was not easy to win support, in part because of his skin color, but the locals were intrigued by this polite, German-speaking young black man collecting water and soil samples. When asked how he feels about his election,
there's a little bit of excitement there and curiosity, of course, about what's coming.
Diaby had to give up his Senegalese passport to become a German citizen, a requirement that still rankles. The other black lawmaker elected this year into the German parliament was Charles Haber of Chancellor Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats. Unlike Diaby, Haber was born in Germany to a German mother and a Senegalese father. It will remain to be seen if Diaby's election will improve race relations in the country. Alan Kiprop for CCTV.
Well, that's it for this edition of Africa Live. Remember, you can stay in touch with us on Twitter using the handle @CCTV News Africa, and you can also visit our Facebook page, that's CCTV Africa. I'm Famida Miller. Thanks for watching.